We are getting some breaking news in the investigation into the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie. But before anything else, subscribe right now, because in this video, we are answering the one question that has haunted this case. There is one assumption that has shaped almost everything people believe about Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. One person entered her home. One person disabled the camera. One person controlled Nancy. One person removed her. One person vanished into the Arizona night. It is a simple theory, and it may be the least convincing one. Because when investigators began confirming what was actually recovered from the scene, biological evidence that does not speculate, does not guess, and does not lie, that theory became very difficult to sustain. The DNA recovered from Nancy Guthrie's home did not reveal one unidentified male profile. It revealed two separate biological signatures. Two separate unknown males, neither matching Nancy, neither matching known family members, neither producing an immediate database hit. Tonight, we go through what that means, the architecture of how this operation may have worked, the route the suspect or suspects may have taken, and the reason this case, no matter how long the silence has lasted, is not built to hold. Because conspiracies do not collapse from evidence alone. They collapse from within. Subscribe right now, hit the notification bell, turn on every notification, because every development in this case gets its own video, and this one has details that have not been covered anywhere else. Let's go. Start with what we know. The biological evidence recovered in connection with Nancy Guthrie's disappearance revealed not one but two unidentified male DNA profiles. Take a moment with that. Because in public coverage of this case, the conversation has almost always centered on the figure on the porch. One person, one suspect, one offender. But the DNA does not describe one person. It describes two. Now, before drawing conclusions, it is important to understand what mixed DNA evidence can and cannot establish. Multiple contributors can mean direct participation, secondary transfer, prior contamination, shared equipment, coordinated action. What it cannot mean is coincidence, because when two separate unknown male profiles are connected to evidence surrounding a single abduction, investigators cannot ignore what that combination implies: coordinated possibility. And coordinated possibility changes everything about how a case is investigated. It means law enforcement may not simply be asking who was on the porch. They may also be asking who planned this, who facilitated it, who else was operationally necessary for this to have worked. Now consider the timeline through a new lens. 41 minutes. That is the operational window between 1:47 a.m. and 2:28 a.m. In criminal behavioral analysis, 41 minutes of sustained presence at a residential scene is not routine. Professional intrusions, burglaries, opportunistic crimes, operate in 5 to 10 minutes. Every additional minute increases discovery risk, camera exposure, neighbor awareness, evidence transfer. So what required 41 minutes? Now think practically. Nancy Guthrie was 84 years old, but she was not incapacitated. She was mentally sharp, physically mobile, which means if she was forcibly removed, multiple things had to happen in sequence. Locate her, control her, prevent any vocal alert, navigate the home, monitor external risk, disable surveillance, move her physically, exit the property, transport her. For one individual, that is operationally unstable, difficult to manage alone while keeping everything controlled. For two individuals, those tasks divide naturally. One manages the victim, one manages the environment, one handles the perimeter, one handles transport. Suddenly, 41 minutes becomes not just plausible, it becomes necessary. Now add the glove. A black glove recovered approximately 2 miles from Nancy's home. Gloves are not random evidence. They are operational equipment, and post-event discards are one of the most revealing behavioral signals in route reconstruction. If one DNA profile came from inside the home, and another came from discarded field evidence along the movement corridor, that could indicate not just presence, but division of physical roles. Not proof, not a conclusion, but pattern. And in this case, patterns are speaking. By the time most people saw the surveillance footage, their focus narrowed to one question. Who was the masked person on the porch? It is understandable. It is human. We want to see the face. We want to identify the threat. But for experienced investigators, the person physically present at the scene may not be the most important person in the operation. Sometimes the visible offender is only one part of a much larger structure. To understand this, you have to separate two roles. Investigators use these as behavioral concepts, not legal terms. But they describe a real division that appears repeatedly in sophisticated criminal cases. The architect and the operative. The architect is the planner, the individual who may possess internal knowledge, victim routines, security familiarity, environmental understanding, timing windows, personal access history. The architect does not necessarily need to be physically present. Their contribution is intelligence. The operative is the executor, the one who physically carries out entry, control, transport, immediate risk management. The operative relies on the intelligence the architect has already gathered. In some cases, one person fills both roles. But in many coordinated crimes, especially those involving financial motivation or personal connection, these functions divide. Why? Because division lowers risk. A planner can distance themselves physically from the scene. An operative can rely on pre-existing intelligence, rather than improvising in real time. That combination often creates crimes that appear confusing at first, because the physical suspect alone does not fully explain the precision. Now apply that to Nancy Guthrie's case. The suspect on the porch displayed unusual familiarity. He approached with apparent confidence. He disabled the camera efficiently. He navigated without visible hesitation. That behavior points to one of two things. Either he conducted extensive prior surveillance himself, or someone provided him with detailed operational intelligence before he arrived. And that distinction matters enormously, because even repeated surveillance has limitations. Drive-bys and distant observation cannot easily reveal interior layouts, gate access habits, device functionality, personal medication patterns, family travel windows, household vulnerabilities. That type of detail comes more efficiently through familiarity, internal familiarity, which is why investigators ask a question that goes beyond who was on the porch. Who knew enough to build this? Now bring in the January timeline. Authorities specifically requested neighborhood footage from January 11th. Suspicious behavior was flagged around January 23rd RD. Those dates are not incidental. They suggest process, testing, observation, adjustment, a planning cycle, not impulse, architecture. And the January 23rd figure moved in a way investigators described as highly deliberate, consistent with reconnaissance behavior. Testing camera angles, mapping detection delays, identifying blind spots. That is not someone inventing a plan on the spot. That is someone refining one. Now, if planning and execution were divided between two individuals, something important follows. One person gathered intelligence. One person acted. Suddenly visibility decreases. Exposure risk disperses. The operation becomes harder to trace through any single point. And that is precisely what makes it more dangerous and more difficult to prosecute. Nancy Guthrie's home was the entry point, the abduction point, the last confirmed place she was known to be. But for investigators, it may only represent the first scene. Because in complex disappearance cases, where someone starts is rarely where the answer is found. Movement tells you what happened next. And what happened next is one of the most important unanswered questions in this entire case. Once Nancy left that home, voluntarily or otherwise, the case shifted from a static crime scene into something dynamic. A route, a sequence of decisions made under pressure, guided by preparation, shaped by the need to conceal. And routes are not invisible. People do not move randomly during organized criminal activity. They move according to familiarity, risk reduction, geographic logic, concealment potential. Which means movement reveals how someone was thinking, not just where they went. Now consider Tucson's layout. Nancy's residence was not in complete isolation. Road access, neighborhood cameras, traffic infrastructure, distance to open terrain, distance to interstate access, potential staging zones and transfer points. When authorities requested surveillance footage from within a 2-mile radius, they were not simply looking for visual suspect sightings. They were almost certainly reconstructing movement corridors, and the glove, recovered approximately 2 miles from her home, fits directly into that reconstruction. Most people interpret discarded evidence as accidental loss, But investigators ask a more precise question. Was this disposal random or route-based? Because if evidence is discarded along a movement corridor, that corridor itself becomes operationally important. The glove may not simply confirm physical presence. It may confirm travel sequence. And sequence changes everything. Now bring in the vehicle. If suspects used a vehicle, which investigators strongly appear to be considering, that vehicle is not just transportation. It becomes a mobile crime environment, a containment space, a forensic transfer zone, a route recorder. Modern vehicle forensics can recover extraordinary detail. GPS history, paired device logs, Bluetooth connections, door activity timestamps, seat occupancy data, navigation searches, cell tower correlations. Even when visible records are deleted, underlying metadata may remain. A vehicle can reveal not just where someone went, but how often, how long, and sometimes, who was likely present. This is why vehicle evidence may ultimately matter as much as DNA in this case. Because homes reveal planning, vehicles reveal execution, and execution is where timelines become prosecutable. Now consider route psychology. Offenders under pressure generally choose one of three strategies: a familiar route, which suggests comfort and local knowledge; a remote route, which suggests concealment as the priority; or a pre-planned transfer route, which suggests broader operational coordination. Each reveals different criminal logic, and criminal logic defines the profile. Tucson's broader environment introduces additional complexity. Urban areas near desert terrain create unusually diverse concealment opportunities. Residential neighborhoods, industrial zones, open land, interstate access. That wider canvas increases investigative burden, but it also increases forensic opportunity. Because every mile of route introduces new exposure points. And exposure points create evidence. Distance does not protect, it documents. If you are still here, you understand exactly why this case is not what it appears in most headlines. This channel goes through every layer of every case we cover. If that is what you came for, subscribe, hit the bell, drop a comment below with what you think about the two-profile theory. I read every one. Now, fracture. Here is something that rarely gets explained properly about multi-person crimes. They do not usually collapse because investigators find the perfect piece of evidence. They collapse from within because conspiracies are not held together by planning. They are held together by trust. And trust, under sustained federal scrutiny, does not hold forever. Think about what the people involved in this operation, if there are multiple people, are living with right now. They know the case is still active. They know federal agencies are still engaged. They know DNA was recovered. They know genealogical technology exists. They know a reward exceeding $1 million is available, claimable anonymously. And somewhere in that knowledge, a question forms. What if the other person talks first? That question is the fracture point. Because in multi-person operations, the greatest vulnerability is rarely the evidence itself. It is the moment one participant begins to calculate whether silence is still worth more than cooperation. Historically, this is how the most sophisticated conspiracies end. Not through dramatic confrontation. Through the quiet erosion of certainty between people who believe they could trust each other. Former friends, ex-partners, peripheral associates. Anyone who was present, aware, or involved, even minimally, now has to evaluate their own exposure against $1 million reward and anonymous protection. And money destabilizes secrets in ways that evidence alone cannot. Now consider the psychological burden. Even highly coordinated offenders consistently underestimate one variable: the mental weight of sustained uncertainty. Waiting, watching every news update, wondering whether the DNA matched, wondering whether a device was recovered, wondering whether someone already talked, wondering whether a distant relative's ancestry database submission just exposed them without their knowledge. That pressure does not diminish over time. It accumulates. And under enough sustained uncertainty, behavior changes. People contact the wrong person, move evidence at the wrong moment, search their own case online from a traceable device, communicate with someone they should not, change routines in ways that become visible. Each mistake creates opportunity. And opportunity is what long-term investigators are building toward. Now bring in forensic genealogy. If either unidentified DNA profile successfully maps through public genealogy databases, the investigation could pivot dramatically and immediately. Because genealogy does not simply identify one suspect, it exposes relational patterns, family trees, associates, regional connections, and in a case with two unknown profiles, two genealogical pathways may develop simultaneously. Two separate biological lineages, two separate families, two separate sets of relatives who unknowingly carry the key to this case in their ancestry. Offenders who believed they had avoided direct detection, who never submitted their own DNA, never appeared in a database, never left a traceable record, may be exposed through a cousin who submitted to 23andMe 3 years ago without telling anyone. They cannot control that. And that is what makes genealogy one of the most powerful tools in modern criminal investigation. It reaches backward through biology into places no one thought to protect. Now consider legal silence. Sheriff Chris Nanos and federal authorities have been measured, deliberate, and carefully restrained throughout this case. That frustrates viewers. But experienced legal analysts understand exactly what it signals. The less prosecutors say publicly, the more likely they are protecting prosecutorial integrity. Premature statements contaminate jury pools. They alert suspects. They compromise cooperating witnesses. They reveal forensic pathways and trigger evidence destruction. This means silence may not indicate uncertainty. It may indicate control. And control, in a case this complex, means they believe the evidence is moving towards something that needs to be protected. Return to the two profiles. Neither matched Nancy. Neither matched known family members. Neither produced an immediate CODIS hit. That last detail, the absence of a database match, is often misread as investigative failure. It is not. It means investigators may be dealing with individuals who have never had qualifying DNA collected through prior criminal processing, previously unknown offenders, or people whose identities require genealogy to uncover, because their biology has never been formally registered. But registered or not, their biology exists, in their relatives, in their family trees, in databases populated by millions of people who submitted samples not to expose anyone, but out of personal curiosity about their own ancestry. And that is exactly how the Golden State Killer was identified. Not because he was in the system, because a distant relative was. Now multiply that by two. Two unknown profiles. Two separate genealogical trees. Two separate biological trails branching outward through family connections, cousins, siblings, parents, second-degree relatives, until eventually they narrow. Each one running independently, each one potentially closing in on a name. At the same time, now consider what that means for the people responsible. They cannot opt out of genealogy. They cannot delete their relatives' submissions. They cannot control what biological information already exists in public databases, and what it might eventually map to. The very people who love them most may be the ones who unknowingly expose them. This is why advanced testing, the phrase the FBI used when describing the current state of DNA processing in this case, is not a routine update. It signals that the sample is being pushed toward a usable profile, that the mixture is being separated, that the noise is being filtered until individual signals remain. And once that process completes, the genealogical pathway opens. And once that pathway opens, the field narrows to a specific type of person, then a specific family, then a specific name. That is not speculation. That is documented methodology, proven in case after case over the past decade. The limitation has never been the approach. It has been the profile, and the profile may be almost ready. So what ultimately solves a case like this? Most people expect one answer, one piece of evidence, one dramatic moment. That is not how this works. Major cases resolve through convergence. Multiple smaller truths arriving from different directions. DNA, genealogy, vehicle forensics, digital extraction, route reconstruction, financial tracing, until they overlap at a single point. And that single point becomes undeniable. Right now, the Nancy Guthrie investigation has multiple active streams. DNA processing that may be approaching a usable profile. Genealogical reconstruction that can work independently of any suspect database. Vehicle forensics that can reconstruct movement, presence, and timing from metadata that persists even after visible records are deleted. Digital evidence from devices that communicated even when their owners believed they were silent. Route analysis that documents every mile of movement as an exposure point. a reward exceeding $1 million that creates financial pressure on anyone peripheral to the operation. And time. Most people assume time benefits the offender. In modern forensic investigations, it often does the opposite. Laboratories continue processing. Devices continue yielding data. Genealogy continues narrowing. Financial patterns continue emerging. And while the person responsible may initially feel relief from the absence of an immediate arrest, their actual exposure may be quietly increasing every week. No arrest does not always mean safety. Sometimes it means investigators are building something that cannot be challenged. Now consider the secondary scenes. Sophisticated crimes rarely end at a single location. Initial contact, control site, transport route, holding site, disposal site. The public focuses on scene 1. Investigators must work through all of them. And movement connects them. Every transition between scenes, every mile driven, every door opened, every device activated, adds to the forensic picture. The paradox offenders consistently fail to appreciate. Distance reduces immediate discovery, but multiplies long-term exposure. Every mile intended to conceal creates new vehicle evidence, new cell data, new timestamp records, new geographic overlap. The further someone moves, the more evidence they leave. And investigators follow evidence. Beyond all of this, beyond the DNA profiles, the operational frameworks, the route reconstructions, the fracture theories, there is a person, Nancy Guthrie, 84 years old, a mother, a grandmother, a family anchor. Someone whose disappearance shattered routines, destabilized people who loved her, and left an emotional void that no analysis can fully describe. She had dinner with her family on the evening of January 31st Street. And she was gone before morning. Unresolved disappearance creates a uniquely painful form of grief. Uncertainty. Not the grief of loss, which at least has a shape, but the grief of not knowing, which has no edges, no beginning and no end, which follows you into ordinary moments and refuses to leave. Her family has continued to speak about her in the present tense. That matters, not as a detail, but as a statement of what this investigation ultimately exists to resolve. Not a prosecution. A person. And everything else. The DNA, the routes, the fracture theory, the genealogy, the vehicle forensics, all of it exists in service of one answer. Where is Nancy Guthrie? So where does this case stand right now? 2 unidentified male DNA profiles, recovered from evidence connected to the scene. Neither matching any known individual. Both being pushed through advanced processing and genealogical reconstruction. A behavioral profile that points to divided roles, planning architecture separated from physical execution. Pre-incident activity across multiple January dates, consistent with operational rehearsal, not spontaneous action. A glove recovered 2 miles from the home, consistent with route-based discard, not accidental loss. Vehicle forensics under active consideration, capable of reconstructing movement, timing, and presence from metadata that persists independently of visible records. A reward structure that creates financial and psychological pressure on anyone connected to this operation. And a fracture dynamic building between people who may have believed their shared silence would hold indefinitely. That is not a stalled case. That is a case under sustained, multi-directional pressure. Now consider the position of the people responsible. At the beginning, they believed the evidence was gone, the camera handled, the plan intact. Over time, that belief becomes harder to maintain. Because silence from investigators does not mean inactivity. And the unknown shrinking, even when that shrinking is invisible from the outside, creates a specific kind of pressure that does not dissipate. It accumulates. And pressure that accumulates long enough always finds a way out. Through a mistake, through a conversation, through a device, through a relative who never knew they were carrying the key, through fracture. Even with all of this, the DNA processing, the genealogical reconstruction, the route analysis, the fracture pressure, there is still something investigators rely on that no technology can replace. Information from people. A vehicle seen more than once near that neighborhood. A conversation overheard at the wrong time. A moment in January that felt slightly off. A person who seemed to know more than they should about Nancy's routine. Those details close cases. FBI tip line, 1-800-CALL-FBI. Online, tips.fbi.gov. Total reward, $1,100,000. Fully anonymous. No name required. No certainty required. You provide the detail. Investigators build the case. Because even the smallest piece of information could become the final fracture point. And the final fracture point is all it takes. 2 DNA profiles. An architect and an operative. A route that documents itself. A conspiracy held together by trust that is running out of time. This case is not stalled. It is converging. And when it converges, it will not come from one thing. It will come from everything at once. Subscribe. Hit the bell. Drop a comment below, because this case keeps moving, and every significant development gets its own video. Nancy Guthrie has been missing since February 1st, 2026. The investigation is moving toward an answer. And the only question now is not if. It is when.